Looks like it's 6 o'clock p.m. So thank you so much for joining us. It's the Power with Purpose OPPD Community Meeting. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Olson, and I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at Omaha Public Power District. On behalf of the entire OPPD team, and I will tell you, it took a lot behind the scenes to get our first ever virtual meeting off the ground. So last night's was very successful, and we're looking for the same tonight. So we want to thank you for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to chat with us. Of course, we wish that we could be face-to-face with you. That's really the hallmark of OPPD and our employees and our board members and so forth. But safety remains our top priority for you, for our employees, and for our community. So to make this virtual event as effective as possible, let's go over a few ground rules and housekeeping items. We'll spend approximately the first 30 minutes of our time together getting you up to speed on our Power with Purpose journey, which we've been working on for several months. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. And especially tonight, I know what's of interest to you is the proposed site at 120th and Military Street that's adjacent to the MUD facility. At the close of that presentation, we'll open it up for Q&A. Our moderator tonight is Erin Tedrick. So Erin, thank you for that. We'll go over Q&A instructions in more detail in a bit. But please know that if you are logged into us via WebEx, we ask that you submit your questions in written format via the Q&A feature, and Erin will do her best to aggregate those, because I know a lot of you may have the same comments on your mind, so we'll try to bracket those together, but we will definitely make sure that we get to all of the questions tonight. Also, if you are dialed in via audio portion of the meeting, we will give you instructions later on and how to indicate that you have a question by raising your hands and so forth. So Erin will be going through that as well. Although the event has been planned to conclude at 7 p.m., for those of you that have been to our other outreach items, we will stay here for as long as you need and want us to and have questions. We also will be posting the questions that you have talked about tonight on our oppdcommunityconnect.com website. And that's an very engaging, interactive platform that we have rolled out. And as well as we will be taking the videotape of this and then also posting that at a later time. So on tonight's meeting, you'll hear from OPPD leadership, including OPPD's President and CEO, Tim Burke, who you see on the screen. And then other members of our leadership team are on as well. And then there's quite a few of our colleagues that if we need to phone a friend, we will definitely do that. So you'll be hearing from them as well. We also have Director Amanda Bogner and Director Ann McGuire that I know are on. So thank you both for attending as well. And we're also very appreciative to have leaders from the community. I know Councilwoman Amy Melton's on, so thank you for that, Ms. Melton, and our partners in the community as we plan for the future. So thank you so much for your participation tonight and the ongoing dialogue as we continue this journey. I know that many of us have spoken with some of you in the neighborhood, so that is not a one and done. We'll continue that conversation. So let's get started. At OPPD, we start every meeting, including board meetings, with a safety briefing because safety is a top priority. So let's start at the top of the organization with our President and CEO, Tim Burke. Tim.
Great. Thank you very much, Lisa. And as Lisa said, we start each one of our meetings with a safety briefing. So I would ask each of you that are on this call or on this video just to check around you to make sure cords are put away or you recognize any tripping hazards. Even sitting hazards. If you sit too long, you may want to stand up and stretch a little bit. So please do that. If there is a concern or an issue, don't hesitate and you'll get directions from Erin shortly here. You can go ahead and put it into the chat or a question into the host. If there is a concern at your facility, don't hesitate to tell us who you are and your address, and we'll make sure we get the proper officials involved in whatever that concern may be. Right now in our facility, we're very focused as a critical infrastructure facility recognized by not only the Center for Disease Control, but the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and all other branches of the United States government because of that critical facility, we are really taking COVID-19 very seriously. And so we're asking all of our employees to practice social distancing, those that are working from home, those that are working in our plants and our facilities and in our centers, to make sure that they social distance, they wear their masks, make sure that they practice proper hygiene. And so on the screen right now are the 10 actions for every Nebraskan to take to slow the spread of COVID-19. And so just a reminder that we make sure we put at our meetings during this pandemic as we move forward. Let's talk a little bit about the objectives that Lisa did talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about Power with Purpose and kind of how we got to the point that we are today, to talk about a couple of sites this week, one in Sarpy County, where we had a conversation with a group of customers yesterday, last evening, and then tonight at the site near 120th and Military Avenue. We're going to educate a little bit on what natural gas facilities are and what they're not. And so you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So please do. It's really important for us to hear your questions. We certainly want to listen. We certainly want to listen to your concerns, your issues, so that we can identify and mitigate those issues and concerns as we move forward. And just as Lisa spoke right at the end, just an ongoing commitment to outreach to make sure that we come back and share with you what we heard and the mitigating effects of what we're going to be doing as we move forward with our Power with Purpose project. I'm going to turn it over to Erin shortly, but she's going to talk a little bit about our Q&A guidelines. We're going to talk about some of the initial customer feedback that we received over the last couple of weeks. We're going to do a little OPPD overview just to get a sense about who we are and how we operate in this marketplace. We are going to get very specific about Power with Purpose and the plans that we have for 120th and Military Avenue. We're going to give a little update on solar, as well as what natural gas backup is and what it isn't, and then move right into our Q&A and really allow you the opportunity to ask whatever questions that you want. And if for whatever reason we cannot answer them today, we will make sure that we get back to you and answer those specific questions. We will know who asked them through the chat. But last night we pretty much, I believe we answered all questions that came in from the public. And we'll make sure if there are new questions that we put them on our FAQ going forward. That's on our OPPD CommunityConnect.com site. With that, I'm going to turn over to Erin Tedrick to talk a little bit about our guidelines for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Tim. As Tim says, we want to make sure we're capturing all of your questions and comments, and those are important to us to get all of those. So you can ask questions if you're logged in to the WebEx using the Q&A session. So as you can see on the screen, if you go to the bottom, click those dots, open the Q&A session, and type in your questions there. If you are using a phone and you're not logged into your computer, you can press *3 and it'll raise your hand virtually, and we'll be able to unmute you and have you ask your question that way as well. And as Tim mentioned, you can go to OPPDCommunityConnect.com where all of these will be posted, as well as the video from tonight's meeting.
Great. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions about that as we move forward, please do not hesitate to chat with Erin. And you can ask questions as we go through this presentation. Please don't hesitate to do that. And then what we can do is kind of group them, put them together, and answer them kind of at one point in time. You know, I think it's really important that you know that we hear you. Over the last couple of weeks, as we shared with our board and publicly shared kind of where our natural gas peaking facilities were going to be, we began to get customer comments, questions, feedback, perspectives, and insights. And so know that we hear you very clearly. And so we're going to continue this conversation. And on the screen are some of the conversations that we have had with people. And so we're going to talk about these tonight as well. And so over the course of the evening, we're going to certainly answer these, but any other questions that you may bring up tonight. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, Erin, and talk a little bit about who we are at OPPD. You know, OPPD, we're 74 plus years old. We're the 12th largest public power utility in the United States. Our rates have always been below the national average and certainly the regional average as well. We serve a variety of customers from into Burt County, north of Blair, all the way down to the Kansas border. We abut up to the river. We serve Carter Lake, and we serve over almost into Lincoln, Nebraska. So that's a broad, over 5,000 square miles of service territory that we serve. And so as we begin to think about these projects, we're really thinking about all 385,000 customers, north, south, east, and west, that we serve across our service territory. And so I think that's really important. Today, we serve our customers with really a diverse fuel mix. So today we have about 1,400 megawatts that we have for OPPD's use of coal. We're going to be talking in a little bit about some of the changes we're going to be making to our coal production facilities at our North Omaha facility on Pershing Drive. We currently have about 880 megawatts of natural gas. We're going to be talking about how we're going to increase that up to 600 megawatts over the course of the next several years. We currently have about 1,000 megawatts of wind today. And we also have 5 megawatts of our community solar initiative. But as you're going to hear tonight, we're going to be increasing that solar array, that generation, up to 400 to 600 megawatts. So we could have anywhere between 1,400 and 1,600 megawatts of renewable energy within our footprint, within our service territory, which is really, really important. So with that, the other item that I think is, for us anyway, is really important is about 40% of our energy that our customers use is generated by renewable energy. And so as we're moving down this path, that's really been our board's commitment to decarbonize our utility. We currently have several initiatives around this. One is our decarbonization initiative. One of these is also one of our 15 strategic directives where we want to be a net zero carbon utility by 2050. And so that means reducing of our carbon emissions. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between coal and natural gas and the difference of those as we move through the evening here. The other item I would say is that we have a publicly elected board of directors. And so you, our customer owners, elect the directors to serve with your interest in mind. And I can tell you, as we've kind of gone through this process with the board to the point where we are over the last couple of weeks to announce the sites that we've kind of evaluated and kind of narrowed down to these 2 really, really important sites for what we're going to be doing and our critical infrastructure that we need to put in place. Our board has been incredibly critical of all the related work. Matter of fact, the questions I put up just a little bit ago, I would say they've asked those questions in 4 or 5 different ways all the way through this work. So they have been great advocates of our customers. They've challenged the management team to make sure we're really taking the interest of our customers in mind and in heart. And so, as Lisa talked about, tonight we have a couple of our board members that are actually on this call. Others will receive the recording who couldn't attend this evening, and we'll share with them a report of the activity that we've had over the last couple of nights regarding these virtual town halls. So Aaron, let's go to the, or Jamie, let's go to the next slide if we could. I'm going to try to define the problem a little bit on why we're doing what we're doing. There's a couple things. The Omaha metropolitan area is growing. There's no doubt about it. And OPPD continually prepares, and over a period of time, we have added generation, and I'll talk a little bit about some of it we're retiring or some that we've actually ceased operation on. But we have typically a 1 to 3% load growth in a typical kind of year. And that's pretty normal. And that's easy for us to kind of manage over a period of time. What we've seen over the last several years is a commitment from customers pretty significantly to increase load. And certainly we are maintaining our capacity to be able to do that. And so we have load growth that's occurring. We have some capacity contracts that we have with a variety of entities in the Midwest that are part of the Southwest Power Pool, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. And then our board in 2014 really made some pretty important decisions around our North Omaha facility. One of those decisions was that we were going to cease operations of coal on 3 units at North Omaha facility, units 1, 2, and 3. And so we essentially in 2017, we went ahead and changed those units from coal to natural gas. And what we're going to do with those units in this Power with Purpose project is that we're actually going to retire those units, 1, 2, and 3, from using natural gas. Those are older units, they're 70 plus years. It takes quite a bit of energy to get them up and operating. And the marketplace that we operate in today is much different. We are looking for fast starting generation to meet either transmission needs or balancing needs or sustainability needs or energy needs in the market. The other thing we committed to is in around 2023, 24 timeframe that we would move units 4 and 5, because we have 5 units at North Omaha, from coal to natural gas. And what we're going to see with Power with Purpose is about a 90% reduction in our carbon emissions at our North Omaha facility. A pretty strong commitment to greening and reducing carbon in our operations. And so you'll see in our coal will move from about 1,400 megawatts in the most recent to something less than that, to maybe 1,000 currently, and then we'll be essentially reducing that by 2024, where we'll pretty much just have about 1,000 megawatts of coal. And so we've made some changes in our generating unit. We've also ceased operation of Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station. Fort Calhoun Nuclear Station was the smallest nuclear plant in the United States fleet. It was outside of the flood in 2011. It was a strong operating facility. But in the marketplace that we're operating in, because of federal regulatory changes, we saw that plant really creating a financial burden. And so what we've been able to do is to cease operations at that plant and commit to no general rate increases for 5 years. And we're in the position where we're going to be going to our board in the next month or so, essentially committing to that in 2021. We will not have a general rate increase in 2021. And so we've been able to really maintain our rates in these changing kind of energy times. And so you're going to hear more about that as we move forward. I think the important thing in this slide, and it's really different in the utility business than it is for businesses. I have to have, if my peak load is during the summer, and let's say my peak load is 3,000, and in our business it's 3,000 megawatts, I need to have 12% above that available at all times, able to operate, able to turbines need to turn, generators need to turn, they got to be available for the market. And part of that is because we're part of a larger organization called the Southwest Power Pool. And Jamie, I'm going to have you go to the next slide. Because we have to have 12% above our peak load, that's really to help the region maintain its resiliency and reliability. And the Southwest Power Pool, Southwest is kind of a misnomer. They were originally kind of organized around the Arkansas, Louisiana, maybe northern Texas kind of area. But the Midwest part of the United States has joined that in around 2014. And so the Southwest Power Pool that energy is moved to north and south and east and west essentially goes to Canada and moves all the way down into the Louisiana area. But this is really important as we begin to think about the energy solutions that we need to have and how our natural gas and our solar can actually work together to provide a resilient and reliable generation source. And what's unique about natural gas is that it can be very quick to respond. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. Most recently, because of, and you see some pictures on this slide, the transmission structure that you see on the top slide in the middle, that's now the Platte River. But that transmission line was not in the Platte River. That Platte River moved about 400 feet, where that site was actually outside of the Platte River. And so these kinds of changing weather dynamics, storms, kind of low impact, low probability, but high impact, are the reasons why we're trying to build resiliency and increase our reliability around our generation. I came to OPPD in 1997, and so I remember the ice storm and the snowstorm. But also, we've seen that periodically damage significant amount of transmission. So as we begin to think about geospacing our generation, it's around making sure that we put the puzzle together so we have and able to maintain generation throughout our service territory. That we are not like a California or Southern California or New York or Texas, that we maintain our system reliability and resiliency. And I think what's really important in the flood that we had in 2019, we had all of our peaking units, all of our North Omaha units, both coal and natural gas, operating for up to 12 days. Now, typically you think of peakers operating in hours, but this is the resiliency component that we're bringing into our conversation. We need to have our generation potentially operate for longer periods of time. And so you may not be able to use a battery storage for a resiliency event. You may be able to use it for a reliability event, but not for something that has low probability and high impact. So that's really important as we begin to think about our solution. We wanted to make sure you understood the problem that we're really trying to solve as we move forward with power with purpose. We can go to the next slide, Jamie. And so our challenges are this. There's been about 1,000 megawatts that have been reduced in this region, whether it's on the Iowa side or whether that's on the Nebraska side. So there's a changing generation landscape that's occurring. We're trying to support the needs of our growing communities, both residential, commercial, industrial, business, data center, a lot of the work that's gone on in our region to make it viable, right? To make it strong. So we're trying to help support those growing communities and the growing region in which we live in. But we also want to make sure that we maintain reliability and resiliency. And so that's why we're speaking of these low probability but high impact events to make sure that we can manage ourselves. The most recent example is the California high heat. They had to do rolling blackouts over the course of a day or so in California because they didn't have the capacity, they didn't have the transmission infrastructure to be able to serve their customers. And our board has been very clear. It is one of our strategic directives around customer service, around reliability. The other framework that we live in is our mission: affordable, reliable, environmentally sensitive. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. There's been some really good questions about, hey, I don't want to damage this environmental area that we're either neighbors to, and I will assure you that we do some very, very unique things to make sure that we maintain the environmental sensitivity of the work that we do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We have 15 strategic directives that run from our vision and mission all the way down to our stakeholder process. And so please go on OPPD.com, look at our strategic directives, but it's very clear directives our board has given us to really manage the organization. And then as I talked about that 12% that we need to maintain in our capacity, those are some of the legal and the regulatory obligations that we have to meet in order to operate without fines, but also to operate reliability with reliability in mind, because that 12% not only supports us, but it supports others when we have power plants that may go down, or storms that may occur in North Dakota or South Dakota, storms that may occur in southern Missouri. And we have our system being able to move power north and south and east and west, really across multiple regional transmission organizations such as Southwest Power Pool and others to the west and others to the east as well. And so over the year, we began to educate our board on resource planning, on how we look at resources, how we look at reliability, how we look at rates, how we look at resiliency. And out of that came a solution that we looked at over 70 million different kinds of options, all kinds of generation options, energy conservation, demand side management options, all kinds of options. And we tried to find options that optimize both economically, both reliably, and also to make sure that it met our environmental sensitivity objectives that our board has set for us. And out of that came several items. One, that we will move to a large utility scale solar with natural gas backup. We'll modernize some of our gas assets. As I said before, we're going to replace our North Omaha units 1, 2, and 3 that are over 70 plus years old with faster, more efficient, more reliable units. And our units 4 and 5 at North Omaha will be refueled to natural gas to still be able to maintain resiliency that we need within our system. We'll look at voltage support devices, but those are really regionally identified in small areas, and they typically attach to our infrastructure, our transmission poles, our distribution poles. And so we began the request for proposal process, and we're currently going through that process right now, and I'll talk in more detail about that as we move forward. So Jamie, let's go to the next slide. So I want you to really focus on this slide to the left and to the bottom left. We have an orange, to me it's orange, orange or red dotted line around what we call RICE units. These are reciprocating engines that we're planning for the 120th and military site. These kinds of engines could be at UNMC, it could be another manufacturing facility as backup generation. A lot of our hospitals have them, businesses have them. And so we're talking about a series of these kinds of reciprocating units for the 120th and Military Avenue site. Here's an example of those. Their stacks may be anywhere between, or the height of those facilities could be anywhere between 65 and 95 feet. And the reason why that range is so high is that we really haven't identified the type of technology or the manufacturer that will do. So there are variances. And so your input, your perspective will help us begin to focus in on those kinds of things we need to pay attention to as we move to the RFP process. You can see our transmission. Many of you that live in that area to the west, we have transmission lines that run to the Metropolitan Utilities District site, but also run to the west of 120th and Military on the west side of that property. And so these transmission lines or this plant will be about half of those size of the stacks that we plan for these reciprocating units. Jamie, let's go to the next slide. So when will construction start? Our plan is that we would begin grading next spring in 2021. Construction will go from 2021 to 2023. Our goal would be to be operational by May of 2023. So, and during this period of time, what we plan on doing, certainly with the neighbors and certainly on our websites and our OPPDcommunityconnect.com, is to provide ongoing updates on where we are in this process. Certainly on the gas sites that we talked at Sarpy County with last night, and City Papillion in Sarpy County last night, and certainly with our neighbors at 120th and Military Avenue. Want to talk a little bit about our solar update. So we are in the process of really identifying a short list of projects with this Power with Purpose, this large utility scale solution that we've identified would be to add 400 to 600 megawatts has been authorized by the board. And what we're going to be doing is we're currently evaluating and shortlisting those that most likely will not be in Douglas County, but will be across our service territory, that large 5,000 square mile area on the eastern part of the United States. We really want those assets to be in our service territory. Again, that helps with our own resiliency and reliability. And so we're in that process right now. The picture shown on this page is really our 5 megawatt solar facility right outside of Fort Calhoun Township, or the city of Fort Calhoun, town of Fort Calhoun. So this was a 5 megawatt site. Solar, interestingly enough, about you kind of plan on a footprint of 1 megawatt equals about 5 acres. So as you can see, over the course of our service territory, we expect to have 2, 3, or 4 different sites anywhere between 50 megawatts and 250 megawatts. And so they will take up large pieces of land. So we're sensitive about that and how we're looking at our solar shortlisting and the ongoing negotiations that we will be doing with these vendors. Now I want to talk specifically about the new gas generation site at 120th and Military Road. So if we can move to the next, this is the area. I think you've all seen this. Many of you have, if you've gone on oppdcommunityconnect.com. This is a site that is essentially bordered to the north of the MUD liquid natural gas facility. MUD has been great partners on the energy side. A lot of our natural gas from Sarpy County and North Omaha come from Metropolitan Utilities District. So we have a great partnership with them. And so this was a great opportunity for us to begin to think about some of the assets and attributes that being next to the MUD facility really provides really for all of our customer owners from affordability, reliability, and environmental sensitivity perspective. On this site, we're thinking of 6 to 9 reciprocating engines, a total of about 100, maybe to 150 megawatts. This would be our smallest natural gas site. So if you think about where we are at Cass County, we have about 360 megawatts. Sarpy County is about 320 megawatts. And if you include North Omaha, 1, 2, and 3 today, they're about 240 megawatts. Again, much different units from what we're talking about on this site here today. And so we'll now dive in and give you some more information and more details around that. I think there's been some conversations about, how did you pick this site and what did you look at? We looked at a variety of different sites, and we shared kind of how we evaluated that with the board, but we evaluated on some of the same siting characteristics and considerations and attributes that we do on all of our siting, whether it's transmission or distribution or substations. There's a social piece of this. Certainly neighborhoods are pretty important to this, right? So we look at these very closely to see how we can jointly house near neighborhoods without creating significant impacts. And so we look at businesses and places of worship and agricultural and schools and a number of different areas. On the environmental side, we're focused on conservation areas and maybe floodplains. We were very clear on these sites. We wanted to stay away from rivers, significant tributaries to rivers because of the flooding that we've seen really from 2011 to 2019 impact our generation. We believe there's ways that we can kind of mitigate some of the wooded areas, and we do a variety of studies. I remember when we did our Nebraska City facility and even Cass County, we did bat studies and a variety of other studies that were really required for us to do, but our team really engaged around those kinds of activities to make sure we're treating the environment well. And then on the engineering side, we need something that is constructible. We need something that has a fuel source to it. We'd like to be near our existing transmission assets in this regard, and we'll talk a little bit about more of those details as we move forward. So we are really kind of focused on small footprints, pipeline access, areas that we could, what we call view shed, that we could kind of protect that area from the public, as we're doing in Sarpy County. And if you saw those sites, we're thinking about doing the same kind of shielding or aesthetics around this facility as well. We're focused on noise, lighting, traffic, all of those activities. But one of the important things about Power with Purpose is to put these loads near growing areas. So Sarpy County, if you've been out at Sarpy County near Highway 50 and Schramm Road, significant amount of growth and developments going on out there. If you think about the growth that's going between Omaha and Bennington and to the north and to the west, pretty significant growth is developing. And so we want to make sure we're prepared to be able to do that. So part of the conversations that as we identified these sites is that they met our Power with Purpose objectives. one, we could really optimize our partnership with Metropolitan Utilities District, and they've been great partners to deal with. One, they had available property. It already has some kind of industrial site work that goes on there. But the other item that, as we talked to some political officials, they said, hey, we're really glad you're thinking about Metropolitan Utilities District so you don't impact community tax base elsewhere. And so we were very sensitive about some of that conversation as we began to kind of work through this. And our board was focused on that as well. A matter of fact, last night on the Sarpy County, we really, as we're working with City Papillion, we actually worked with a local developer, Model Development, to help us think about that site and future development, that a developer could actually utilize that site and some light industrial that actually would increase the valuation of that site. So we're really sensitive to those kinds of activities. We want to be near our critical electric infrastructure. So the transmission that's on the south side of the MUD property, and it's on the west side of 120th Street, are all opportunities for us to be close to those transmission infrastructure, really, for those reliability and those resiliency related needs, to be able to move energy in, to be able to move energy out, to maintain power throughout our service territory. I've already talked about the growth piece of that. So we can go on to the next slide, if you would. Let's see here. I just want to make sure I covered all my pieces of that. I think I have anyway. So we're going to talk about kind of the technology that we're thinking about. The picture on this slide is really our Elk City landfill RICE units. So these units take landfill gas and they utilize those gas. These are 8 units that are there. These are reciprocating engines as well. They're not as big as what we're talking about, but you can kind of get a sense on what that looks like. And you may not even know this site is there in many cases. But we're looking at 6 to 9 units, 6 to 9 reciprocating engines, a total of 100 to 150 megawatts. They're going to have dual fuel capability. So they're going to have fuel oil capability. They're going to have hydrogen capability. But because we're situated right where MUD is, it also has pipeline capacity and really a reserve, liquid natural gas reserve capability for us to be able to use. And that was one of the unique characteristics about this site. What we hear in our industry is that as we move to more intermittent solar, wind, what we are losing when we're moving away from coal, outside of the environmental impacts that we're improving, what we're losing is stored supply of fuel. And so this was a really strong kind of emphasis for us to begin to think about how we could utilize liquefied natural gas in our operations at this facility. Again, natural gas has about half of the carbon components as coal does. So as I said before, we're significantly going to be reducing our carbon footprint as an organization. And I'm going to talk a little bit about noise. I'm going to talk about visual screening for aesthetics. These are peaking facilities. Contrary to coal plants or nuclear plants that are base load units, you turn them on, you don't turn them off until they either have a maintenance problem or an issue, or you have to refuel them in some way. These units today at OPPD only operate about 5% of the time, but they're really there for those critical periods. As I said, when we had the flood in 2019 and we had some of our coal generation jeopardized on the Missouri River, we had to shut them down for safety reasons. Our peaking generation essentially maintained high reliability within our region. Most people don't know that kind of activity that we do every single day, every half a quarter and eighth cycle, that we have to make sure that we maintain electricity in this region. So we will focus on visual screening, but these are quick, fast ramp up kind of plants where you can ramp them up within 5 minutes. It's like, it's almost like starting your car and boom, you can start them up and get them to full load relatively quickly. And so these are really important. Major, I would say, large banking institutions, large insurance institutions, hospitals, data centers, they have this kind of technology within their operations as well to make sure that if there is an occurrence, they have the capability to have energy and power to get them through. Now, one of the things that we heard very clearly is that how loud is this going to be? And so we worked with a local partner, HDR, to help us on some sound analysis and studies. And essentially, what there are some very clear rules and regulations that we have to abide by. But what you're going to see is that these reciprocating engines will be, and I'm just going to move to the next page, but think about moderate rainfall around that on the left side, that 50 dB. And I'm going to go to this map. And so what we've done just for this facility is to begin to identify what that noise will or could look like. And so there are some very clear City of Omaha code and requirements, and we meet all of our codes and requirements on all of our generating facilities, whether it's on the environmental side or sound or all of the elements that we're required to maintain, or we exceed those in a very positive way. So the City of Omaha has a code that says you can't have a maximum of 55 dBA at night or a maximum of 60 dBA during the day. And so as you can see in this site, it has a relatively small footprint. And so we're going to see on some of those outputs where it's going to be more like moderate rainfall. It's going to be like a dishwasher. And that's without any mitigation. We may have some plant mitigation, but it's not including additional tree or aesthetic mitigation that we're going to be doing at this facility. So I think it's important to know that to the extent that we're really trying to think, and our board is challenging us as well to make sure that we are thinking about these items as we come into this development process. Now I want to lay out some rendering perspectives, if you wouldn't mind. Go ahead, Jamie, and go to the next page. This is really you can see MUD on the top center, that kind of cylinder kind of area. And we will be just to the north of that. If you think about where that tower is, it's going to be kind of nestled down into that little valley that's down there with some tree cover. What's really important to hear is that it's a great public-public partnership with MUD and OPPD. Our boards are having conversations. Our management teams are having conversations to see how we can help each other through these changing kind of energy days that we live in. But what's really important for us is this gas supply synergies that we have. They've been great suppliers of our gas and peaking needs to date, and they do it in a very cost-effective way for OPPD, and therefore that means it's very cost-effective for our customer owners. And we're co-locating with another utility. This site is not on the tax rolls today. And if we looked at some other site, it would be taking something off the tax rolls. We're very sensitive about that. You can see the arrow pointing to the north. I'm going to go to the next slide to kind of give you a visual on what that would be. This is a visual kind of looking south of the plant, the proposed plant, north and west. It's a view from Ramble Ridge Road. And this is existing kind of what it looks like in September of 2020, and it's kind of looking northwest. Let's stay here for a second, Jamie, if you would, so people can get a sense of this. It's not a street view, but it's kind of a view on what it's going to look like above the trees, so you can get a sense on what we're thinking about and what we're considering as we begin to build out this critical infrastructure. If you go to the next slide, Jamie, now, this is really a rendering where we will think about some landscaping and how we'll see that site. Again, it's from this same area. You may see some towers. This is kind of a worst case scenario. You may see some transmission that will come from the south, maybe to the north. That has not been determined at this point in time, but we'll have to have a substation there and then our generating plant. And so these are just renderings, landscaping. These are without tree buffers around the site. And so we're really, paying attention to see how we can kind of mitigate either visual, sound, or other impacts to this site. So Jamie, let's go to the next slide here. we went ahead and now, and we've put in some tree buffers in here where we will plant trees, other vegetation. Um, if you have read anything about OPPD, we've been very environmental conscious. We just did our SD11 report, SD7 report on our environmental stewardship, where we do a variety of pollinators across our power plants. We partner with community agencies around that. We do a variety of other tree planting and tree. We're a Tree USA company for many, many years, as long as I've been here, which is almost 24 years. And so it's we're very attuned to what's going on the environmental side. So we want to make sure we have the landscaping and the tree buffering, one for the visual perspective, but also to maintain the habitat that has been accustomed for this area as well. Let's look at this from a different rendering perspective. Again, this is a southwest view from Military Road, and this is an existing kind of conditions as of September of 2020. I'm going to go ahead. You can see where north is. I guess some of you that may be on this virtual site probably live in some of these homes. But let's go to the next site. This is kind of where the visual would be and the rendering looks like on where our substation will be, where our generating station will be. And these is without any tree buffers around it at this point in time. But you do see this transmission line intersecting in this area. And these are just proposed yet. Again, we have not done that stakeholder process. What we will share with the public is that we need to go from point A to point B, and what's the best way to be able to do that. And the public will have the opportunity to help us craft what that may look like. And we do that very effectively. Let's go to the next slide. And this is with some buffering and what that will look like as you buffer around the plant. You can see the communications tower to the right, and you can see the transmission infrastructure of that substation. So we need transmission going in, transmission going out, may even have to have two transmission lines going in and coming out as well. And so that's part of the additional planning that we'll be doing and additional site work that we'll have to do. Let's jump to the next slide here. I think we received several questions. So on the slide early when we heard you, it's about, hey, I want to make sure that we protect the environment. And I don't know if many of you have seen this, but on the OPPD website, we have a live family of friends that live at our North Omaha station. A matter of fact, one of our vice presidents that's actually built this Falcon house, and it's been repopulated. There's been 3 babies that are now full grown on the right side that are, I think we're having to, one of them didn't want to leave their home. May sound like some of our children, but the other 2 are gone and doing just interesting things in the area. And so that's just a small part of our commitment that we've done on environmental stewardship. On this live feed, we've reached over 4 million people worldwide. So it's an opportunity for you to see that our commitment and what we're doing and how we're doing that. And I will tell you, that's a very clear commitment from our board to be able to do as well. So our board is, it's one of the strategic directives, the 15 that they've given us is our environmental stewardship. And so we really need to commend them for our ongoing commitment around that. So let's go to the next slide. A couple of these highlighted areas, I think I've talked to about some of these and what they may look like. I'm going to talk a little bit about the highlighted lines on this sheet here. From an environmental side, again, I talked about natural gas is far more environmentally friendly than coal, and that's why our organization is moving to net zero carbon by 2050. We will meet all regulatory, all environmental protection agencies, all Nebraska environmental agency rules and regulations. Matter of fact, we exceed them in many cases. Our coal plants are really, most of them are in the low emitter status. So we're well beyond, very positive beyond the environmental indices on how they are rated. And so that gives us great pride to make sure we're trying to treat the environment as good as we can. And so you will not be able to smell these emissions. These are natural gas. They're odorless. Now, natural gas, coming from the gas side of the business at one point in time, they do odorize it, but not in the emissions. You won't see that or smell that. We did look at property values. And so we had some analysis around that. And what we had heard from the experts is, hey, we don't see any changes in property values, primarily because that site really has not changed the intent of that site, where MUD is on the south side and we're going to be on the north side there. It'll be, again, aesthetically pleasing. Our intent is to do that through trees and natural growth, and certainly, we don't believe, and the experts have told us there should be no negative impact to property value. We were sensitive to that. Our board was sensitive to that as well in all of our conversations with them. And then how this will impact our rates. Again, I told you just a second ago or a little bit ago that we're going to go to our board in the November timeframe and essentially say there's no general rate increase. So these plants will not be the reason to drive rates up. A matter of fact, they're going to be offset by these growth revenues that we know are coming and that we've contracted for with a variety of customers. And so we think that's really important for all of our customer owners across our 5,000 square miles to really understand. And so those are some of the questions that we heard most commonly. And we understand that, as I said before, these are some of the same questions that our board asked 3 or 4 different ways to make sure that we understood their concerns and their issues as we came to our final solutions for our Power with Purpose natural gas sites. So Aaron, I'm going to turn it over to you for us to begin the Q&A process. And so I'm going to get a drink of water, and Aaron, I'll turn it to you.
Great. Thank you for that. So this is the part we'll start answering your questions. We've got a lot in through the chat. I think we've addressed a lot of them through these, but we will go over all the questions that have been coming in. So please use your chat box, as you can see on the screen, how to do that. There's the Q&A that you press the 3 dots and the Q&A will come up. You can type in your chat and we'll answer those. If you are on a phone and not on your computer, you can press *3 to raise your hand, and we can take you off mute for you to get your question answered. So with that, we already do have some coming in, and we'll get started with those that have been coming in from the chat during the presentation.
And just for the, and Aaron, real quick, and just for the folks that are listening in or watching, there may be a time where I call on a subject matter expert. And there'll be a couple I may call on. So one would be Scott Edom, who's our Director of Engineering. Mary Fisher was not able to be here tonight. She's our Vice President of Energy Production and Nuclear Decommissioning. And the other individual we may call on is Megan Walker, who's really the project manager for this, who has most of the deep details. So don't get worried if I pass it to one of them to provide a response. So thank you, Aaron.
Hey, and this is Lisa, and like we said, we're going to stay on as long as you have the questions. And if you need to drop off, be sure and visit OPPD communityconnect.com, because we will be populating our FAQs all the way along this journey and timeline. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Lisa. So we had a lot of questions coming in. I know there were slides and we talked about the location of the site, but just wanting more clarity around that exactly. A lot of questions around, is it 114th and Military or 120th and Military? And just wanting more clarification around that exact location of that site.
Yeah, so I'm going to go right to Scott and Megan as we begin to think about that. And again, I think we're also working through those details on the site, the details of the site plan. But I'm going to go to Scott right away and just check to make sure his mute button is off. Scott?
Yes, I'm ready to address the question. So the question that Aaron has kind of summarized several of them is, where is the proposed location? Is it closer to 114th and Military or 120th and Military? And I did see another one on why did you not consider the intersection near 120th and Military and the land that's there, so I can address those both at the same time. To answer the first question, yes, the proposed site will be closer to the 114th and Military. So as we saw the overhead view of the proposed location, it is a little bit further east of the intersection of 120th and Military. And that corner location that's graded now, we did do a preliminary view there, but again, oh, you can stop right there, Jamie. Yep, but that'll work. So you can see in the yellow area down to the right, that is a little bit further east than the intersection of 120th and Military. So that is the proposed location to be on that site there. Again, all details of design and exact location have not been completed yet. And again, the triangular piece of land near 120th and Military that was looked at, but again, because we are intentional about the potential noise impact, we did a preliminary study and it was very close to the boundaries and the houses in that location. And because of the natural grading and layout of the site that's shaded in yellow, with the mitigation measures that Mr. Burke alluded to that we have preliminary assessed as part of the design, we can meet some of those noise ordinances on the east side or the yellow shaded area, whereas on the west triangular portion, it would have been more of a challenge.
And Scott, I would just also say, to the public, and this is the reason why we're doing a virtual stakeholder kind of town hall, is to really get your perspectives and insight around that, but also answer questions, but also get your perspective around what we're trying to do and how we're trying to really try to address these concerns. And as we hear them and as we see them in the Q&A, and as we move forward, we want to make sure we find ways to mitigate the best way that we can those issues. And so we're committed to do that. Okay, Aaron.
All right. We have a question. Why was the area chosen so close to the houses and not closer to 128th and Military intersection?
I think Scott just answered that. I believe so. So if there's any further details someone wants to ask, please do so. But I think he addressed a couple of those questions.
And so we just had a clarifying question. So the plant will be built in between the tree lines that are showing. I think that was around the slide that kind of showed what that would look like.
Yeah, so the artist renderings that we showed, it's a great question. It is preliminary and based upon the existing site. We will have to clear some of the trees to ensure that we have a cleared area for the facilities that we intend to construct, including the transmission lines. The main point here is this site does lend itself due to the natural sloping that, as you can see in the artistic rendering, although that the site details are not known, and we tried to center the location based upon, trying to minimize that impact to the noise. What it does is, even though it may clear trees, it allows us to provide additional options for planting additional vegetation after construction, so that we can restore some of those trees in accordance with some of our environmental plans.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Scott.
Great. We have a couple questions around the intersection. So the intersection of 114th and Ida Street is already extremely dangerous. Turning on or off that street is particularly unsafe due to speeds and blind spots. What will be done during construction to increase safety? I'm concerned with there will be accidents.
Yeah, I would say this plant that we will have during operation anyway, will have very few people on the site. So it's not going to have 200 employees that'll be coming in to work on a day-to-day basis. During construction, like we do on any of our construction, whether it's replacing infrastructure on roads for road widening projects, we'll work with the cities very closely to make sure that we meet all the safety guidelines and exceed those. Safety is a pretty important element of ours. It's actually one of our strategic elements within our organization that we're focused on. And so we'll just make sure we'll coordinate with the city. We have a good working relationship, but we also consistently are in roads and doing developments and doing infrastructure and we'll make sure we try to minimize that as best we can for that area, and make sure we do it safely.
Hey, Tim, I'll just add there the commitment to reach out to the neighborhoods and so forth and make sure that we keep the lines of communication open there, especially with the homeowner associations and so forth, and keep people posted that way as well.
That's good.
Another question we've had around, and I know we talked a little bit about property values. We have a few questions coming in about potential impact of property values and why we chose the site.
Yeah, so I think as we talked about, the reason why this site was so beneficial for us is that we needed a fuel source that was relatively close. And so with the fuel source that is near that site for the Metropolitan Utilities District and a gas pipeline capability there, also with the LNG capability for the future, where you have stored capacity of fuel there, that's important potentially for us in the future or whatever that may look like. So that's important. It does is relatively close to transmission. So south of the MUD site is a transmission line, and to the west, I believe on 120th Street is a transmission line. So there's an opportunity for us to interconnect those and to allow us to have transmission coming in and transmission going out to provide broader power, reliable, resilient power across our whole region. And that's the reason why this site was identified, but also because we really felt we could mitigate the concerns and the issues that many of you are addressing today. And many of you have talked to us about already. And so that gives us, very clear perspectives from customers in that area that as we begin to finalize the design that we want to take into consideration so we can mitigate those concerns and issues that you may have as customer owners that are nearby this facility. I will share with you north of Cornhusker on 36th Street in Bellevue, we have 5 generating units that are there. We have a development that's just to the north of there and a development to the south of there. And again, we meet all sound and noise and implications there. And so we really have not received any concerns or issues from those customers because of those facilities. And they have aged assets there. So they have assets that have been there 20 some years or so. And so these are going to be newer assets. So they're going to be more efficient. They're going to have the new technology built into them. And so specifically and they're 2 different kinds of technologies. So at the Sarpy County Station where we have 5 units, those are combustion turbines, relatively large units. These are going to be much smaller units individually and much more like you would see in a commercial, industrial, hospital kind of setting, these kinds of engines. And so they're relatively quiet in that regard. And so we really wanted to, ascertain and do the measurements, and that's why we got a third party to make sure those were done correctly, and we'll work with that third party also to help us with some of the aesthetics on this site.
Yes, we are getting a lot of questions around the sound, and one sound concern is around considering or how do the sound concerns change when you consider traffic and the facility?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of interesting. If you go back to that sound slide, traffic is at a much higher. This in this example again. Remember, these are not operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They are only operated today about 5% of the time. Now, we're in our estimates, it may move to 10%, maybe 5 to 15% over the life of these assets, depending on what's going on in the market. But I would tell you these are going to be much lower than the current kind of traffic sound that occurs in these regions, let's say on 120th or even on Military Road. And that's what we wanted to make sure is that does this site with 6 to 9 units operating with some sound mitigation, can we maintain it to be in that certainly meet the codes of the city or exceed the codes of the city of Omaha, and we're committed to do that.
Hey, Tim, I'll just add there in regards to the number of employees and so forth, it's going to be consistent with the MUD number of employees. So there won't be a high traffic area of employees coming in and out of.
Thanks, Lisa.
Great. We have a question on how many residents are in as close proximity to the Sarpy site versus the military site.
I don't know the numbers, but having knowing that area, because I used to live in that area, there's a whole residential development that runs from on the north side, north of Cornhusker. Now there's a lot of property that is not used north of Cornhusker, but that's because it's the ACUS for Offutt Air Force Base where their landing area is, but north of the plant is where that development is. It butts right up to the plant. And we do have vegetation and boundaries and some space in that. And then it's right across the street. There's a large development. My guess is there's 200 to 300 to 400 homes to the east, probably 150 or 200 homes to the north.
Also, how many sites did you look at for this?
Well, we looked at several sites. We looked at some existing sites, and they all had some unique advantages, but sometimes they had unique disadvantages. And so we looked at our current North Omaha facility that sits on the river. One of the things that we wanted to make sure is that how could we mitigate the changes that we're seeing in the river and the flooding that's occurring in the river? So how can we mitigate that? We don't have enough natural gas capacity in that part of the city, and so we would probably have to build a line multiple miles to attach to another pipeline on the Iowa side and come across the river. There's environmental impacts to that. There's timing to that. There's a lot of concerns and issues around that. And so that was one of the concerns. But then ultimately it was, how do you geospace these generating units to create and maximize the greatest value? And that's where we began to end as we looked at, could we put 2 more units at Cass County? Well, there's some transmission constraints. So we would have to build significant transmission on the south and to the west side of our city to be able to do that. Pretty significant. And this transmission is $3 to $4 million a mile, and it kind of gets you a sense in what that looks like. So from those affordable, environmental, reliability perspective, we really felt that this site. We also looked at Fort Calhoun site, but as we see this growth occurring, it was just a really a nice site in partnership with MUD to be able to put these assets together. Really for not only the natural gas resiliency that MUD has built that site for, but also for the electric resiliency that OPPD is building this site for. So we looked at multiple sites in multiple ways, so I hopefully that answers those kind of questions and items.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions.
Yeah, Aaron, real quick. So just you saw the map, but we still have, we're going to have assets, North Omaha units 4 and 5 that'll be operating on natural gas after 2024, coal up until that time frame till these assets come online. 1, 2, and 3 will be on gas till these assets come online. So we have generation up in the North Omaha side. If you think about us moving that to the west, we have our Sarpy County station. We have our Cass County station, and then our southwest Sarpy County station. That's our current plan. It's the one that we spoke to the public last night on. So we're really trying to geospace these for the best resiliency related impacts, and really trying to stay away from the river as best we can, just because of the uncertainty of weather and the impacts of weather.
All right. We have a lot of questions coming in about the animal and plant life in that area. So there's an abundance of wildlife habitat, specifically a large area of pollinator habitat. Is there a plan to restore disturbed areas to have pollinator habitat?
I would say yes, and I guess I can do some commitment on that. I think what we'll look at is all that property that we would own and operate, we would try to certainly restore at a minimum, if not maybe even increase the capability of that with additional pollinators. We have been, I know Emily Muth is on the phone call in our environmental side, and Russ Baker as well. They've been instrumental in working with community organizations on pollinators, on wetland related impacts, and they just do an amazing job. And so it's really kind of an opportunity for us to put kind of our sights from an environmental perspective to be able to do that. So, my commitment to you would be at a minimum we would restore, but we would kind of put the OPPD environmental touch and as one of our critical strategic directives to make sure that we potentially even improve the area that we have control of.
Will this interfere with the migratory path of geese and seagulls?
No, I don't think so. These are relatively low. I don't see that. There's already relatively high structures in that area. Um, I think the LNG plant is 100 feet above grade. It kind of sits in a bowl as well, and that's kind of what we're trying to do with this asset, this critical infrastructure. Typically, the transmission lines in the page I showed you before are typically in that 100 to 125 feet in the air, and these will be much lower than that. We don't anticipate any impacts. As a matter of fact, in most of our generating facilities, whether it's Fort Calhoun or Nebraska City, we have Sarpy County, Cass County, we are used to wildlife on our site. So being close to rivers, we work very closely with natural habitat folks and organizations to make sure that we're incredibly good stewards, and that's our commitment. It's one of our three legs of our mission stool: affordability, reliability, environmental sensitivity. And so you'll have my commitment that we'll do that.
Are there plans to care for the wild turkey and deer population in the current location?
Absolutely. I mean, our site will be protected by a fence because we don't want them into our, as well as our substation, that we don't want them into our electric infrastructure. So we'll protect them from that, and then we'll think about other ways where we do that. We work very closely with Game and Parks and the federal interior organizations on avian protection. We've migrated and moved large birds, raptors that built nest in transmissions where we move them to separate structures. Once we kind of do all of that assessment, we're going to make sure that we live out that commitment to make sure that we take care of the wildlife in that area. We understand that very clearly.
And I know you mentioned a fence. There was a question, will there be a fence around the entire facility?
There's certainly going to be a fence around the critical infrastructure, which would be the power plant and our substation that will be joined together there. I don't think, I'll let Scott answer that, but I don't think there's going to be around that whole footprint. It'll really be around the asset that we're looking for. So Scott, I'll look to you to maybe answer that question.
Oh, Tim, you answered it properly. We're planning to have fences around the critical infrastructure and the generation and substation. But that entire site that was outlined again with the yellow would not have a fence around that entire perimeter.
Our intent is to really, and I know, and I appreciate, because I've been in your seats before in my lifetime. We are very serious about this. We really want this site to be able to maintain as much of the harmony and the strength that it has today, and we will be really good stewards. And you'll have my commitment to that. You'll have access to me as often as you need me to come and talk to your neighborhood associations or homeowners associations, and the team as well. And that's the reason why we have these, is to get your kind of feedback input. So our team has a really clarity around what we need to do to be really good stewards. And we'll put those plans together, and we'll come back out and we'll share those plans with you as part of this feedback mechanism. So thank you.
Next question. When you talk about new landscaping, will you be putting in mature trees as opposed to small trees? Will you be removing very large trees that currently are against the MUD tower? Will you plant trees large enough to hide the construction?
I think we will probably plant trees tall enough. We want to make it as aesthetic as possible. There'll probably be a combination of all of those, because some will grow faster than others. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you can't put in a 60-foot oak tree or elm tree, but we will work through that. Our intent is to try to make that as aesthetically pleasing as we possibly can as we move forward. And so we do need to have barriers for our transmission. There are very clear federal rules and regulations about foliage underneath transmission lines and foliage on either side of transmission. So we'll kind of create those safe barriers. That's where we see the pollinators probably being more of an impact, where we'll build that potentially under our transmission lines, but not trees, not large bushes. That was one of the areas that created the New York Northeast outage, back in 1996 or 2006 or whenever that time frame was. But it's those elements that we make sure that we adhere to the regulations and the rules that we're required to adhere to.
And Tim, I'll just add there, it'd be a great opportunity with fall right here to head over to the Arboretum, the OPPD Arboretum at 108.
Blondo. Yep.
Yeah, and Blondo, and take a look, because those trees are an education portion of it, of where you should plant around transmission and for energy efficiency as well.
I mentioned a little bit about our avian protection plan. There are things that we can't do during nesting season, and so we're very attuned to that, and we actually have a very strong and deliberate avian protection program. And our transmission design folks, our constructors, our operators, we typically hire third parties to do that review to make sure that we're not negatively impacting nesting and those related areas. And so we're very, very keen on that. And our environmental group, holds us accountable for that very clearly.
And how tall will this new structure at 120th and Military be? How does it compare to the height of the current MUD tank?
So, as I said before, the MUD tank is about 100 feet off, 120 feet off of grade, but it's kind of in a hole. It's in a little valley there, so it's kind of sunk down. It's about 100 feet from the normal grade on that site, and we're talking about towers anyway. To be anywhere between 65 and 95. The buildings themselves will not be significant at all. I mean, they're the exhaust towers will actually be the 65 to 95. Scott, keep me honest on that to make sure. But maybe you could give a sense on how tall will the buildings be on the site.
Sure, you're accurate when you say that the exhaust stacks are the likely will be the tallest facilities in the generation portion. You've also stated that there will be transmission towers that will be tower lead has not been completed yet. To answer the question about what will the engine hall and other supporting structures on site be, again, the final design is not completed, but I would expect those buildings to be again between the probably 25 to 40 to or so feet, maybe 50 again. But the tallest structures will be those exhaust stacks from the generation portion of the facility.
Thanks, Scott.
Can you talk about what other pollutants will be created with this plant other than carbon?
Yeah, so go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so is burning fossil fuels. We do have some nitrous oxides that are referred to as NOx, and also some um, sulfur oxide. Sorry, I was trying to remember that. But again, all of those pollutants will be controlled by permitting that's regulated and approved by the Environmental Protection Agency and Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. So again, there are some of those emissions other than carbon that are expected by burning the natural gas or other alternate fuels. But again, we will be within all limits as required by the regulatory body permits.
And as Scott identified, certainly we have the state and the federal, but locally, the city of Omaha, their environmental group, just like they regulate us with our North Omaha facility and our other operations, they will also have the regulatory authority as well within the city of Omaha.
Yeah, and just a clarification, the sulfur emissions be very low with the natural gas. That would be more if there was a fuel oil, which again will be we'll have capable, and that'll be a very minimal amount of time.
And what are the risks of gas leaks?
You know, I don't think there's any different risk with gas leaks today than today. You know, we are very good stewards of our assets. You know, we will have gas extended into the site for the units, but we maintain our facilities incredibly well, and I would say there'd be no increased risk in that. We'll work with the local pipelines, Northern Natural Gas and MUD, to make sure that's the case. So I see no additional risk for those sites. You know, these have really high-tech automation sensing systems that if there is any kind of uh, malfunction, they shut down and valves close automatically. We will have folks on site at these locations so they can mitigate any other alarms or related issues with that. And I would say our safety record on not just our natural gas units, but even our coal units, where, you know, in Kansas City and I know in southeast Iowa, they've had coal ignition events. You know, we have had an incredibly strong safety record. And that's part of our commitment as your neighbor too, is to make sure that we maintain our high safety profile going forward.
We have a question. Is this final? And what is the path for people who have complaints?
Yeah, I would say, is this final? I think we have not done the final design, so the answer is it's not final, and we haven't done the RFP to really narrow down the kind of asset and what that asset's going to look like on the site, to take in the consideration, your feedback and perspective around that. So from that perspective, it's not final, and so we'll continue to take feedback as we move forward on that. This site is a pretty important site and really meets our power with purpose kind of criteria for us to move forward on. So our intention is to move forward, but I would ask you to continually share your concerns, your issues, your ideas, your thoughts. So don't hesitate to do that, because as we get closer to the design, I'll get the example I would give you. In working with the city pavilion, they said, hey, is there any way to paint the stacks green? Right? So as it meshes into the background. And so we said, we can paint the stacks kind of whatever color you want to paint. So let us think through that. So how do we go about doing that on these kinds of things? So it's that kind of feedback we're going to take all the way through this process. So I would ask you to continually engage with us on that process. and certainly, again, continue to raise your concerns with us, and give us an opportunity to help mitigate and resolve those issues.
Is there a federal license required for this project?
I don't think there's a federal license required by this project. It is, we do have to meet federal regulations around it, but we will be going to the Power Review Board in October. We've made a filing that occurred a couple weeks ago after our board meeting, made a filing to the Power Review Board for both natural gas assets, that in Southwest Sarpy and that in at 120th and Military. And so we've made that filing with them. There are very kind of clear guidelines that they follow to approve or not approve those. But that would be really the only filing that I believe we're required to do, except for environmental permitting and some of those kinds of things that we would be required to do with any facility that we would have.
Is it possible to repurpose one of the 3 structures being decommissioned and use that instead of building new in a residential area?
So we are limited, and the answer is about North Omaha. Is there a way to repurpose those 3 structures or that site? The concern of the issue is that we still need that peaking generation for 2 of those units, unit 4 and 5, that'll be on natural gas. But again, we don't have capacity to operate all 5 of those units, or these units that would sit on that site. We would not have enough gas capacity to be able to do that, and neither would MUD. And so we would have to go multiple miles away. It's fairly costly. It has pretty significant, from our perspective, environmental impacts potentially of going under the river and impacting a number of regulatory agencies, including FERC and the Corps of Engineers and a variety of others in that process. So it really became troublesome for us. And if you think about where our load is growing from that geospatial diversity perspective, our load is growing west. And so we just continually put generation on the east side where our load is growing west. And by that, you begin to increase your risk. And so this gives us kind of multiple geospatial sites to begin to make sure that we can balance the system in the most resilient and reliable manner.
How does this facility use the hydrogen, natural gas, et cetera, to make energy? Is it burned or other?
Scott, you have the degree,
Yep.
so knock it out of the ballpark.
Yeah, so similar, the natural gas is injected into a cylinder and then ignited with a spark, and then that energy is transferred to the piston and then to a crankshaft, just like your car engine burns gasoline. And then that energy is transferred to a main output and then to the electrical generator. Hydrogen and trace elements can be burned by these. And again, as Mr. Burke alluded to, as part of our sourcing process or RFP, we are asking those questions on all types of alternative fuels that the engines can burn. But
Thanks, Scott.
What is a capacity contract?
So a capacity contract is, as I talked about the Southwest Power Pool, we have to have 12% over our peak load during the winter and during our summer. And so we have to have the capacity, the ability to be able to turn that generator on. And in some cases, they ask us to start it, to operate it, and then to ramp it up when we need to do that. These units do that very quickly. And so this capacity is that we can call on it really at any point in time. And that's the reason why we're looking at dual fuel to have the capability to use fuel oil, although the fuel of choice for us in the region would be natural gas. But there may be times or months during the year where our load is down that we may be required to use fuel oil if it's called on by the market or by the Southwest Power Pool. But again, our preference, both on the operating side and on the cost effectiveness side, is be able to operate it with natural gas. And so that's the capacity. It isn't necessarily a I could buy a capacity contract that's in North Texas or Louisiana or Arkansas, but I don't know if I could get that power to my region. And there are a variety of risk elements in that, specifically if we're impacted by significant transmission damage outside of our service territory through storms, weather, other flood impacts, or whatever it may be, whether it's terrorist impacts or not. It's an opportunity for us to think about that differently. But that's the capacity. Energy is the things that are generated by each of these units that we have to make sure we meet too. So we don't have a problem when we have a high heat wave that comes through like California did, and all of a sudden they don't have the generation available or they don't have the generation online that can meet that energy load. And so what they do is they curtail people. They have brownouts or they have rolling blackouts to reduce the load to meet their energy needs. And that's what we're really trying to build are those low probability but high impact related issues as well. So hopefully I explained that capacity contract okay. So if that helps.
We have a question on safety in the area. Can you talk a little bit about the safety of putting a facility like this near neighborhoods? Is there any risk of explosions either during construction or while operating?
I would say I would be remiss if I didn't say certainly there's opportunities for explosions, but I would say based on our operating characteristics, these are trained technicians, trained installers, and construction folks that do this all the time. We have not had those related issues. So I would hate to say there's no risk because my enterprise risk folks would say there is a risk. Yeah, you have a fuel there that you're going to be burning, that you start a spark, you have a combustion. So there is that potential. But I would say it's probably no different than in your home. And except we have people that are 24 hours a day, 7 days of the week that are technically trained to take care of it. And that's exactly what they do. They are an amazing group to maintain all of our assets in the most reliable, safe manner. And our safety record speaks to it, whether it's our industrial safety record, whether it's our vehicle safety record. We lead the industry in that in each of those categories.
Will there ever be a circumstance when fuel oil will be burned more than a very minimal amount of time? Could you explain what those circumstances might be, for example, when loads are higher than expected?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. We had unit number 1 at Sarpy County just this past summer that had a natural gas valve that failed. But that unit was called on for the market because even though all of our power generation was up and running, they had some others in the region that had failures or their units wouldn't operate. And so that unit was called on for reliability purposes. And so it used fuel oil in that regard. Those are the kinds of circumstances that fuel oil would be used. Potentially during the winter times, if natural gas is curtailed, if it's a very extreme cold area and MUD says, hey, we're not going to allow you to use natural gas, and the market calls on us to use fuel oil, we would use fuel oil or the alternative that we talked about before, hydrogen, when it is capable and available. But again, it's not our fuel of choice. We prefer to burn natural gas, but we need to have that alternative there for those emergency purposes.
We have a question around the construction site, a couple. What will be done to handle the large amount of construction equipment, mud, rock, trash? Will these items directly affect the residents? And also, what will a typical construction hours be for those 2 years?
I'm going to phone a friend, either Scott or Megan.
Yeah, so all great questions with respect to the construction. What I can say is we will work with the construction contractors to minimize the traffic impacts, the work hours within the city, take mitigating measures with respect to potential dust, or drainage, so that we will focus on those as part of the project to make sure that we are a good neighbor. I can't specifically address the exact times. As we stated in the conversation, we do expect to start grading next year in 2021, and then work through completion. But it will, be that entire time. And again, those details of the exact construction duration and different phases will be worked out, that we'll communicate through messaging once we have those details.
Yeah, and I would just add, we are used to these kinds of large construction projects, whether it's on the transmission side, whether it's on the generation side. And so, we'll take into consideration all of the traffic impacts, try to understand those. We'll work with the city to get their knowledge around that and what's the best way to be able to do that. We understand dust and construction materials. I would say, we are, well, I will commit, we are much better than that than in kind of residential construction areas, just moving into a new house. I just, picked up a bunch of stuff and that was up against my house because of the wind that we've had. So we're very sensitive about that, but that's what we do. We do these kinds of projects. We do them incredibly effectively. They're on time, they're on budget, but they're done incredibly safely. And we'll make sure we work with the agencies, the counties and the city to make sure that we do this right. And I answer my own phone. So, if there are problems, we'll have a site person that you can certainly probably talk to. That'll be an OPPD person that'll be there, and you'll have access to our community folks that want to hear from you. But I took 2 customer calls today on other issues, so I'm going to be available to take your concerns as well.
Yeah, and I can just add, aside from being a good neighbor, there are construction type permits for stormwater permitting that will control some of the mud and sediment and excess drainage off the site. So as we've tried to answer, right, it's both being a good neighbor and obtaining and complying with all permits required for the construction.
Yeah, we were one of the first folks in the stormwater prevention program. Our environmental folks worked with our construction folks, where we do training with our teams and what that looks like. We'll make sure the contractors have all of those understandings about what the requirements are in any of the bidding documents, and then we'll have site management on site, making sure that they live up to that commitment. And so we kind of treat our contractors as if they're OPPD employees, and they have the same commitment to the community that we do. So we'll continue to do that.
And I know we answered the question around the final design. We've had a lot of questions coming in since then about the final location. So just want to clarify that this would be the final location and that's been decided.
Yes, that's been decided. And then the elements all around that, it is exactly where it's situated on that site, and is really to take the feedback and the perspectives and insight that you have all shared, for us to take that into consideration as we begin to do the final design. And our commitment to you would be to come back out and have this similar conversation with you around what that is and how we took the mitigating factors that you've raised as concerns or issues or items, and how we've tried to mitigate them through this process.
Hey, Tim, I also like to offer, if there's meetings that are already scheduled and so forth that you would like to have OPPD speak to neighborhoods or so forth virtually or whatever the safe way you would like, we will be more than happy to do that as well.
Great, thanks, Lisa.
We have a question about pollutants. Is it only air pollutants? Has an assessment of the impact to environmental and human health been done? And if yes, is that report available to the public?
Scott, why don't you just talk about all other elements of the operation of the plant? And
Yeah, sure, Tim. So as I alluded to earlier, we will obtain the specific permits from the Environmental Protection Agency. So that includes, and the Nebraska Department of Energy and Environment.
And City of Omaha.
And the City of Omaha, thank you. And again, those are for a multitude of parameters. So they are both from an air permit and a water discharge. So yeah, we will be in compliance with all permits. We have hired additional expertise to assist us in this project. They do have environmental specialists as well as our internal environmental specialists regarding permitting and all things associated with the current operation of all of our similar peaking units and baseload power plants. So again, we'll work together as a team to both identify, obtain those permits for both construction and final operation and ensure we are in compliance. So short answer is, yeah, there's air and water and a few others that will obtain and again, meet or exceed per those permitting levels.
So in a worst case scenario, which could be likely given the unpredictable world we live in? Are EPA standards different from RICE engines, and how will OPPD plan to protect this and surrounding neighborhoods from these emissions?
Well, I would say, certainly the local, state, federal, they all work together. But then we have our own commitment to make sure that we protect our customer owners as well. So I would say there's enough rules and regulations to protect the public in all of those related environmental, physical, site related issues. We take those very seriously. And I think as Mary talked about, our Vice President of Energy Production and Nuclear Decommissioning last night, that we meet all of the environmental and exceed them in a positive way in most of our generating facilities. And so it's just not meeting the rules or the law. It's about what's the best thing for us to do. And we are consistently finding ways to do things better, whether it's less water use at our power plants, that maybe doesn't even have a rule or regulation on it, but we take those things into consideration in what we do. So hopefully we've answered that question on the environmental side. There should and will not be any issues on the environmental side that would impact the public in what we're doing.
Okay. Is it a fiscally good idea to be totally reliant on MUD to be the sole provider of natural gas for this site? If not, why this site? MUD might be a good partner today, but leadership changes, as does the industry.
Yeah, I think that's part of this whole balanced energy portfolio that I talked about before. So if you think about just at this site, but in most of our gas sites, we do have a backup fuel source for whatever the reason. But what is interesting in the market that we live in is that natural gas is really a market setting price. And so because we're using such little natural gas, even if gas prices go up in the region, all of the money that we would generate from selling into the market goes back to our customer owners. And that doesn't happen on the investor-owned side. But 100% of it goes back into our revenues to keep our rates low. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are below the national and the regional averages on rates. And so, I think MUD has been a good partner for many years. Our Sarpy County site is served by MUD. Our North Omaha site has been served by MUD. A matter of fact, we worked with them to upgrade gas. So rather than starting on fuel oil, those large coal units, we started the boilers on natural gas to reduce emissions. Not something we had to do by law, but it's something we did to reduce our emissions and improve our efficiencies as well. So we do have some diversity built in there in all of our generation, from a large scale, whether it be solar, whether it be fossil fuel, coal, natural gas, whether it be wind. My guess is you'll see other generating technologies surface over a period of time. And we'll take advantage of those as we think about growing our generation fleet or modifying or changing our generation fleet in the future.
We have some questions around timing and input. How long have you been planning this? Was there public input on site selection, and why did OPPD board members not communicate it sooner?
That's a great, that's a great question. I think part of the conversation that we had with the board was, again, they've asked every single question that you have asked tonight. I would tell you in a number of different ways. And so part of it is, and this is the struggle that we have, is that if you go out and say we're looking at a site, what happens to a site is it may or may not be available when you need to go there. And so we had very clear, definitive sites that we needed to be able to have natural gas availability, to have transmission availability, to really have that geospatial load across our region. Those were several elements that were very critical in our recommendations that we made to the board. And as we began to identify alternatives and sites, this happened to surface. And as we began to look at that and have conversations with MUD, they were open to us exploring that. And so from the board perspective, we didn't come to kind of a finalized this is the site until we began to do some of this initial analysis and kind of break it down to say, of all the sites that we looked at, this is a site that creates the greatest value for all of our customer owners and meets our resiliency, our reliability, our affordability, our environmental sensitivity perspective as well. And so that was the reason why. But I tell you, they had your same interest and perspective as we were meeting with them and talking about power with purpose on the natural gas side, on the natural gas sightings, on the potential solar sites as well that we begin to move forward on. I mean, we made it very clear in November that we wanted these sites within our service territory, but we also very clear that we wanted them close to natural gas facilities, transmission facilities, and geographically spaced for the greatest reliability and resiliency.
We have a question that this location is the decision was made and it's final without any previous public input about the location.
Yeah, I think the public input we're asking for you today is, as we've identified this site, which really meets the elements that we've developed and determined to be really important to move forward with power with purpose, based on the growing load, based on the changes that are occurring in our other generation. And so this is one of the stakeholder processes that we're asking to engage with as we begin to come to final design, as we begin to put the site on the paper and begin to kind of look at that. We want that input for us to make this site the best site we can possibly have. And we believe we can harmoniously kind of live together in this area of the city.
Is this project subject to approval by the Omaha City Council?
No, I don't believe it is at all. So.
You looked at the area at the corner of 120th and Military, and I understand the reason to put this site here. However, interested in if OPPD or the city has any plans for what could become a beautiful public space at the corner.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback for us. That's exactly how we work through this with the DNR and the city of Omaha on 108th and Blondo, is that the Natural Resource District had some property. We had a substation. We kind of got together and said, hey, is there a way for us to build a OPPD Arboretum around this. And it's that kind of feedback from you that is really important for us now to go to some of the partners on the site to say, hey, are there opportunities for us to do something different on this corner or in this area? So I appreciate that idea, that concept, and so that's great for us. We're gonna put it on the list for us to begin to think through and work through.
This one's around home evaluations. After some cursory studying, it looks like property values go down by up to 9% close to the power plant and fade out to 2 miles. Is this pretty well known, or do you have better data?
Well, I don't think this is well known. I think from the folks that we've engaged with, they would say this site is really this industrial property anyway, and that's already determined in current evaluations, and we should not see any changes in that. And again, the manner in which we're planning to encompass the aesthetics and the development and again, incorporate your feedback and perspective around this, we don't believe there's any impact to property values.
We have a question around the renderings don't really show much. I haven't seen a view that shows what the plant will actually look like.
And we'll have that opportunity. Again, this is our opportunity to get your feedback early. And we'll certainly come back out in some format, in some way to begin to put the details together as we work through the design, the RFP process, the design process. We do have a transmission stakeholder process that we're going to need to incorporate in the coming months here. So you'll have an opportunity to give us feedback on siting and location of transmission. So there'll be those opportunities for that kind of feedback.
This person's asking, we're getting a lot of general answers to questions about the negative impacts, environmental, health, property values. Where do we go for specifics?
Well, we'll give you the specifics when we have the specifics. Again, that's why we're getting your feedback and input kind of as we move forward on this site for this development for the RFP that we're going to be putting in the marketplace, and getting those feedbacks and getting the feedback of those bidders and alternatives, with much of the feedback that you've given us on aesthetic related issues, site issues, visual issues. And so I would continue to share them with us as we move forward. At this point in time, we don't have the specifics, but we will. And so this is the start of the dialogue. And so I would ask you to trust us, to know that we're going to be coming back as we have specifics to share those with you, and to just be open and honest. We're giving you the best and the most information that we have today. We're not hiding anything. Matter of fact, we tried to put, the renderings as best as we could, just to give a reasonable representation of what it might look like, what it could be, how we might be able to aesthetically protect it. And so we'll continue to work through those and take your feedback as we move forward.
Deer Creek is building townhomes off the northwest corner of 120th and Military. Was the site pushed east because of pressure from the Deer Creek Golf Course and neighborhood?
I don't believe so. I don't, unless people are on the, I think what we tried to do is to think about it from operationally what's the best, but also how can we best harmoniously live with the neighbors to the east. But there's been no input by golf course or anybody else in this specific location to date, anyway. So, and again, we'll give you the specific plat layout of where this site's going to be as we get to that, and in the coming months here.
Next question. It concerns me when you mention possible commercial development in that area in the future. Did this spark interest from not all companies? I think many of us want to preserve a quieter piece of Omaha.
No, so when I talked about the Noddle company, that was really on the Sarpy County. Um, we asked them to give us some perspective around that. And it was really in conjunction with the city pavilion on that project. And again, this site is different than that site, and kind of you know, we would do the exact same thing with the city of Omaha as we begin to have those conversations with them as well. And so we're not engaging Noddle on this site at this point in time because we may not own that commercial property around that at all. That's not what we're planning on doing. A little different than maybe the Sarpy County piece, if I'm understanding the question correctly. Anyway. So.
What are the initial construction cost estimates for these two sites?
Go ahead, Scott.
So I can address those. The budgetary estimates for the military site that we're discussing now is approximately 257 million, including the substation. And the budgetary estimates for the South Sarpy County location, which has different technologies, is approximately 394 million, again, with the adjoining substation for that facility.
Thank you. Also, is this plant going to have a stack like a OPPD plan or a tower as shown in your initial height slide? Which one is it?
Okay, so that'd be a great clarification of the terminology. When we say exhaust stack, that is the exhaust pipe, if you will, of the internal combustion engine. So that would, again, as we've stated previously, be the tallest structure. Stack is a generic term, so yeah, we'll clarify that. That's the exhaust pipe from the engine itself. And again, on that stack, there can be silencing materials, just like a muffler on your car. So again, that's what we're talking about when we say the stack. It is the exhaust pipe, if you will. And again, those are expected to be the tallest structures of the generation portion of the new facility.
Thank you. 1 second, we're just making sure, looking through which ones we're missing still. I know we have questions.
Yeah, Aaron, maybe what I'll do is I'll just do next steps, and if there's some final, we'll kind of clean those up.
Okay.
So let me just go to the next step slide. Actually, go to the project. So we're currently continuing our solar sourcing, and again, it's outside of these areas that we're talking about. We're going to continue our natural gas generation sourcing, as Scott has alluded, going out to different vendors and RFPs and begin to work through that. We'll begin to initiate transmission and substation execution phases, and again, have an associated stakeholder outreach. You know, in this world of COVID, seems so impersonal to do it virtually, and we apologize for that, but we think it's important to have the discussion and dialogue. Normally, what we would do is we would be in a large area, probably out near 120th and Military, and have people begin to walk through, and we'd be able to, you could kind of see the whole project and elements of the project, and have a dialogue with all these subject matter experts that are just amazing at their work, and for you to do a deep dive where you wanted to do a deep dive. These are a little unusual and cumbersome, but we thought it was really important for us to engage in the region, in the discussion and the dialogue. So we'll be doing that also on the transmission side. And again, the only thing that we can identify on the transmission to begin with is kind of point A and point B. And then the public can give us perspective and insight. And then we have to identify, kind of based on all those social, environmental, and engineering attributes that I showed earlier today. They would go through that same process and identify a final route and what that looks like. And our commitment is to give you timely updates as we move forward in that process. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Aaron, you have any other questions?
I think we have a couple more that came in. Is there a current like facility that could be viewed on the internet to give a better picture of what it will look like?
Well, I think we showed that site at the Elk City site. It's a little different because these are smaller units. But Scott, is there some similarity that we could post on our OPPD communityconnects.com?
Yeah, we can follow up with that to give some representative sites that are readily searchable on the internet that could be representative of what our site would look like.
Yep, that sounds good.
I think we have one question, then we'll go to the phones. How many DBA are at the birds locations? I think that's for the falcons.
Well, they're really no different. So that's within the city of Omaha and the environmental permitting of the city of Omaha, but also under the noise elements of the city of Omaha. So there is no really difference in that on that site.
I guess, Tim, that I can just add a little bit there. You know, those falcons are that their nest box is right on the exhaust stacks of North Omaha. And so they are at the center, if you will, of the noise location. So the highest part of the sound producing equipment. So as obviously the sound emanates from the source, it reduces just naturally due to energy dissipation. So, you know, we don't have the exact noise levels, but to Tim's point, we are in compliance of those ordinance. So at the site boundaries, we are within the city of Omaha noise levels. So those falcons have nested in probably the highest noise areas of that power plant. If I could just add that.
And we worked very closely with avian professionals in citing that. I think there was a question that I just want to make sure it's clear is that, you know, these are, you know, I think the question was, these are peaking facilities. So today our peaking facilities operate on general, and I report those each month on our board meeting on the capacity factors, which is the percent of time that they operate. And so we typically see about a 5 to 6% capacity factor on these plants. And the question is, would these ever be full time? And the answer is no, they're not meant to be full time plants. If we were going to go to full time plants, we would go to combined cycle plants that would have units that would run, and they're more combustion turbine plants that would operate 100% of the time, use the steam off the two engines to generate another engine. And now it's a very, very large combustion turbine or combined cycle system that would operate 24 hours a day or at much higher capacity factors, probably closer to our generation we have today, which is in the 80 to 90% capacity factor. We don't anticipate them at all anywhere near that. We would not operate them full time. They're just not made for that kind of operation. So they're really meant to be these peakers, kind of that 5% on the low end, you know. And again, today we operate them at about 5 and 6% capacity factor.
We do have a couple of questions around the sound. Is the 55 dBA noise rating per rice or in total? And do you know what frequency pitch the noise will be? Is it high or low?
Yeah, it's a site noise measurement based on city code. But Scott, I'll let you talk about pitch.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that information really available, but again, we can follow up that question by posting it to the website specifically. I can also go back to another question that I tried to answer previously, so a little bit of clarification. And Jamie, could you go back to the slide that shows the overhead view of the general vicinity in which, you know, the yellow section of land that we're going to build? Yep, thank you. That's the exact spot. So there was a question submitted regarding, you know, several comments on whether or not the neighbors to the east, or excuse me, yeah, to the west near 120th and Military, As I tried to answer previously, you can just tell by that size comparison that that triangular piece that borders the intersection of 120th Military is much smaller. In fact, there's only about 8 or so acres of usable land there that is graded. So as we did those preliminary designs and tried to fit the technologies to meet our overall objectives of approximately 100 to 150 megawatts, the close proximity to the street and the site boundary, not the what the homes are comprised of, but just the site boundary, it was very difficult to achieve those ordinance levels and be within that, just based upon the smaller site and the mitigation methods that we were employing. So again, although we did the initial review, the reason why the eastern side or the yellow shaded portion was, again, there's more land to properly fit the site on to kind of spread out and allow that natural dissipation, as I stated earlier, of the noise energy, coupled with those mitigation measures that we plan to employ as part of the final design, again, to ensure that we are within those ordinance levels. So hopefully that kind of answered your clarifying questions there with respect to which side of that the property that we had narrowed in on.
And Scott, I think the other item, when we talk about noise, it's about when that plant is fully operating. That plant, when it's not operating, you won't even hear it.
No noise.
So I mean, unless somebody honks a horn in a parking lot, you might hear it. But we only measure that when it's operating. So it's at operating levels at those times. Again, for that relatively low capacity factor that we currently have in our peakers today.
We do have another question around the sound levels. Will the sound levels you discussed earlier only be when the facility is running or all the time?
Yeah, I just tried to answer that. Sorry about that, Aaron.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's just that's when all the units. It's a site sound, and so when all the units are running, we'll do that, and that's what we've tried to model today in this scenario. And then as we get closer to specific equipment, we'll have the vendors and the engineers go through that modeling again. And then if we have to install mitigation to even reduce that further, we may have the capability to be able to do that. So and then there's also the aesthetic and the natural greenscapes that we can do to assist even with a lower decibel level that would leave the site. So we are very focused on that, and we understand that. And so thank you.
Hey, Tim, this is Lisa. One of the conversations I had with one of the neighbors was they were concerned that there would be a constant humming sound and so forth. And so, Scott, if you could address that to say yes or no.
So again, I guess when the generating station, this peaking station is operating, those are the noise levels that are expected for the entire site. Without knowing exactly what the question was, but the humming could be due to the electrical equipment as part of the substation. That is not my area of expertise. But we do have some subject matter experts on the call that may be able to answer that more directly.
Yeah, and what we can do is we can follow up with that as well.
Yeah,
the
I think that's
and so forth. So I apologize that we didn't have full context for that.
No, but I guess, yeah, to answer that too, is that the substation is going to be quite a ways from the housing development, really. And so it's going to be incredibly mitigated. We have substations today that are right next to houses, that have some maybe a lot buffer, and then houses. And but this is going to be quite a bit greater distance would be my guess, from the substation and to where the homes or the other businesses may be. So.
We have a question here. Again, was there any sites researched in the west part of Omaha, higher income neighborhood areas, since this is a growing area of Omaha?
Well, I would say not in this situation today. There was, I would say, again, we don't want to go so far out where, at least today anyway, we don't want to go so far out because we are trying to find natural gas transmission, electric transmission, and there may not be two of those that interface each other in an area that kind of meets our need for growth and development and interconnecting of our transmission. Now, I would say as we begin this strategy 15 years from now or 10 years from now, there certainly may be some of those that would occur in that area. But not for this example. The ones that we immediately looked at, I think I talked a little bit about the Cass County site, North Omaha site, some other Sarpy sites on the eastern side, but we're really trying to geospace different gas transmission, electric transmission as well. For us, it didn't have anything to do with higher income or lower income. It was really, once we identified the critical elements for the needs of the plant, now how can we mitigate kind of around those areas, and what does that look like? So I'll just leave that at that. So.
We have another question along with the question about Deer Creek. You talked about the proximity to neighborhoods around 120th that made it less attractive. Deer Creek is far more affluent and less diverse. Rainbow Ridge and Cherry Ridge are not. Do you have a response?
Again, we know there's gas assets on this site in our partnership with MUD. We know that they have liquefied natural gas capability, so it's a reserve fuel component for us as well. And that if you think about the proximity of where the transmission is on the south side of the MUD facility and on the west side of 120th, that made for a great intersection of all of these attributes that we needed for a generating facility. And then became, okay, now how do we begin to harmonize with the region and with the area, and what does that look like, and how can we mitigate any concerns or issues? And I think we've done a really good job on the early part of this conversation, and you're giving us great feedback and perspective and insight for us to follow that through in the next phase, which is let's get to a more finalized design. Let's understand the sound issues that and the visual issues and the environmental wildlife related issues that seem to be pretty important, and let us come back with some clear responses about how we are engaging or mitigating or increasing the attributes around those areas for that reason.
Structures for this project will be 100 to 120 feet tall and look very similar to the line that already crosses the MUD property near 120th and Fort. Can you talk about this?
Well, so we don't know where that transmission line is going to be yet. So that'll be a separate substation transmission siting project, primarily transmission, where we will have to interconnect the transmissions sites. And so we have not done that yet. You'll have an opportunity to engage in that. Again, what our team does is they'll know that we'll need to connect this substation to that substation or this substation to these transmissions. So what's the best or the right route? And they'll have the opportunity to get that feedback and perspective and insight. We'll go through our evaluation process to identify what's the least impact on social, environmental, and constructability, and come with a finalized solution around that transmission. And that's what they will do. And we've We just completed a relatively large transmission project in Sarpy County where we did that incredibly effectively. And our teams are very sincere about that. So we'll continue that similar process. It'll change a little bit in these COVID worlds we live in with this kind of environment, or we'll think about some other alternatives because in some cases, I think it's important to kind of go to the Gemba sometimes and actually see what we're going to be doing and what it's going to look like and how we get there. So that's more to come on that.
And I know we have a couple people on the phone, so I do want to give them an opportunity to ask any questions that they have. So if you are on the phone and have a question, you can press *3 so we can unmute you and you can ask a question if you'd like. Give you a moment. If anybody does have a question, you can just press *3 now. All right. Well, I think that's we got through the questions, and if there's no phone questions, that's what we have.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you, Aaron. In fact, Jamie, if you'd like to go to the next slide, and then Aaron, if you could just keep monitoring if anybody raises their hand, that would be great. So, because we are committed to continued stakeholder engagement and feedback, this is not one and done by no means. You have a commitment that will continue our outreach. And if you need to talk, be sure and leave your contact information in the chat box or go to www.oppdcommunityconnect.com. We also want to hear how you thought about this first virtual outreach because it's new to our organization as well. And as Tim said, you know, we are a very personable organization and we love to just sit down and talk with people. But in light of the safety, we wanted to make sure that we had this opportunity to hear your voice. So be sure and fill out that post survey so that we can always get better. We love to get better in what we're doing. So we also will be doing our FAQs and updating those as we go along. And then as well as there's a timeline on the website, which if you'd like to go to the next one, Jamie, that would be great. There's a timeline, a part of this engagement platform, and I'm so proud of the team. As we said, we were going out with our State of the Utility in March, and of course had to check and adjust, as we say in the nuclear world, and definitely came up with a new platform, and it's called OPPD Community Connect. We are the first utility in the United States to use it. And we're excited about that. And it's going to be a great platform to even talk about our decarbonization efforts and diversity and inclusion in the community and so forth. So be sure and visit it often, bookmark it if you'd like. And we also will work with your homeowner associations. Jamie and the team will be sure to do that to keep you posted on what's going on. And I know many of you are actively involved in social media. With Nextdoor, the app and so forth, as well as we have many of our employees and OPPD and MUD employees that live in your neighborhoods. In fact, many of them will be backing up to this facility as well. So we've done outreach with them and we'll be talking with our MUD employees during the next week or so. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your time on behalf of the entire 1,800 OPPD employees and our leadership team. Tim, anything that you'd like to end with?
No, I would just say, yeah, I would just like to say thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to talk about Power with Purpose and specifically this site. And thank you for the conversation that's gone on up to tonight and including the questions that you've asked. And hopefully we've provided some clarity on some of that, recognizing we may not have all the details and all the answers, but your kind of engagement around that is going to help us move to that kind of final design solution and the elements that we really want to focus in on as we move forward. So I just want to thank you very much for that. Thanks, Lisa.
Yes, thank you. Have a good evening, all.
Good night.
Great. Thank you all. Be safe, be healthy.